So anyway, I was relieved about that, but I spent most of Friday just, oh my gosh, it's will I have a house left? And it's just- yes, yes, absolutely. Well, that's such as Central Texas weathercasting. If they weren't predicting it like it was the end of the world, they wouldn't have a job. I guess so. No. Well, here we are courtside at Highland Village Church of Christ. It's a great night for basketball. And oh wait, I just I just get into these fantasies whenever I put this headset on. Yes, yes. I just any moment I expect Vern Lundquist to show up, and he does the play-by-play, and I do the color. And well, show us a little color, John. Well, yeah, the Mavs are out there in their bright yellow jerseys, and it's all the fans are holding up their nice blue signs, and that's not what I meant by color, John. it's, it's Colonel Hogan, would you pray us in? Mm, mm, mm. Amen. James, thank you. And I really appreciated one of the phrases that you used in your prayer because it reminded me of something that Paul wrote in one of his letters. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be opened, to what the Spirit is offering us. And so, yeah, right on. Thank you very much, as always, for that prayer. If you haven't already opened your Bibles or devices, let's turn to 2 Samuel chapter 18. We are in the big middle of a battle. It's battle day in Israel, and of course, uh, this is a result of Absalom rebelling against his father David. Runs the man out of town. David is in exile officially. Absalom has is taken charge, all without, I might add, never consulting God or anyone associated with God to say, "Hey, is this what God wants me to do?" He just presumes to take the throne for himself, and everything's gone to his head. That the head with a magnificent mane of hair. He gets talked into, hey, you ought to form this big army, go after your dad, and you can lead them in. You, Absalom, man of the people, General Absalom, someone who probably had never spent a day figuring out the business end of a spear, much less how to lead people into battle. Well, the day of battle comes, and it takes place in the forest in the hill country north of Jerusalem or surrounding Jerusalem. And it's not even a fair fight. It's not a fair fight because God is on David's side, and that decides it, first of all. But it is a rout. It is a battle that probably lasts maybe 22 minutes. Uh, According, I don't know that there's an exact time, but uh, in verse, the verse 6 in chapter 18 talks about the outcome of the battle, and Absalom's troops were routed by David's men. And in fact, we saw the difference between the two men. The writer of Second Samuel talks about how David, the experienced warrior that he is, organizes his battle troops into groups, and then also positions them. Okay, guys, this is where I want you to fight here, here, and here. He knows what he's doing. Sends them out. He stays inside the central location, central headquarters, where they're located, at the advice of his men. They said, basically, please don't go out to fight with us because if someone captures you, it's game over. So he listens to his men. He stays behind. And the battle, as the writer recounts it, basically the, the the casualties that day were great. 20,000 men. Think of it. That's a huge casualty. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. That's due primarily to the providence of God fighting for David, and it probably also very likely says something about the incompetence of Absalom to wage war. Uh, in terms of the forest swallowing up men, and probably being the result of most of the casualties that day, we're talking, in all likelihood, we're talking about fighters who become, because they don't have a real leader in battle, they become disoriented. They start panicking. They start running in the wrong direction. They wind up falling off cliffs. They fall into pits. There might even have been something like quicksand in there. They become entangled in the woods, and a wild beast sees them and says, "Hey, here's lunch," and that's the end of that guy, or a variety of guys. And so it's a bad day for Absalom. It's so bad for Absalom that verse 9 tells us that Absalom happened to meet David's men. Uh oh. Not a good thing, especially if he's being surrounded by them. And so he tries to get away as quickly as he can. He was riding his mule. I still, I'm, it, it, I'm still struck by this image of this man of action, this general of battle, riding on a mule that maybe goes 2 feet an hour or something like that. Probably not all that cooperative in terms of, hey, let's get out of here. Well, the mule's trotting along, and you see this kind of comical scene. Absalom either miscalculates how tall he is or how high this approaching oak tree is, or he's not paying attention because he's looking over his shoulder to see who's chasing him. And the mule went over under the thick branches of a large oak, and Absalom got caught in the tree. Now, most translations say his head got caught in the tree. Ouch, ooh, especially if it was around the neck. Jewish legends say that it was actually Absalom's hair. We don't know that for a fact, but how ironic. This is the guy who loved his hair so much he only cut it once a year just to see how much he could grow. A point of pride, and that may have developed into this legend among the Jewish faithful that it was his hair that gets caught in the oak branches. That would be even more painful because the result is he was left dangling in midair while the mule he was riding kept on going. I mean, you have to try not to laugh when you see this image here of poor old Absalom. And verse 10, when one of the men saw what had happened, he told Joab, hey, it's just the craziest thing. You're not going to believe this, Joab, but I just saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree. Well, Joab doesn't see the joke. He says, Mr. Joab, man of action, says, what? You saw him? Why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? Then I would have had to give you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt. Hey, big deal, big promotion. Hey, not only a cash prize, but a warrior's belt. That was the equivalent of like a Purple Heart, big medal. You wear that around, you are something in the Israelite army. Well, the guy is principled enough and honest enough to talk back to Joab. Verse 12, he said, hey, even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out into my hands, I would not lay a hand on the king's son in our hearing. And you'll remember this because these were the exact words David gave to all the commanders and also in the soldiers' hearing. He said, to you and to Abishai and Ittai, the three major military commanders, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I had put my life in jeopardy, and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from me. This kind of tells you the reputation Joab had among his men. Yeah, he gets the job done. He's a man of action. He's ruthless. And he's not particularly loyal to who serves with him. This guy's basically saying, hey, Joab, I know you well enough. Yeah, I could have killed this guy, but it would not have mattered at the end of the day what kind of rewards you gave me because it would the news would have gotten back to the king, and the king would have had the kind of response that we would expect him to have. And when that happened, I know you well enough, man, that you would not have come to my defense, even though you told me to do it. Well, Joab has had enough. Verse 14. He says, I'm not going to wait like this for you. So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. Doesn't kill him outright. He would probably die anyway if he got anywhere near the heart. He would have struck something that would have taken down Absalom eventually. But Joab's not going to wait for him to die. Here come 10 of Joab's armor bearers who surround Absalom, struck him, and killed him. So Absalom is truly, sincerely dead, like the lyric in The Wizard of Oz. He has met his fate. Interesting. And some commentators are kind of hone in on this number, the number 10, because there were 10 concubines that David left in charge of the palace. Those 10 concubines were ravaged, were raped by Absalom as part of his public show of me and my dad don't have anything in common anymore. And now it's 10 of Joab's armor bearers who put him to death, administer the coup de grace. Well, the deed is done. The battle very likely ended, or the decision of who won was made much earlier. But it's time to call things to a halt. Verse 16, Joab sounded the trumpet, the shofar, the ram's horn. At any time that soldiers heard that, they dropped whatever they were doing and went to the guy who was blowing the horn. The troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. They took Absalom, threw him into a big pit in the forest, and piled up a large heap of rocks over him. An anonymous burial, very likely to ensure he is not memorialized. We're not bringing this sucker back to Jerusalem because who knows what they're going to do with his crypt to start another rebellion somewhere down the road. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. Game over. Absalom's forces, they know that they've lost. They've gone back into full retreat. David's forces have decisively won the day. And then we have this little note about Absalom. Verse 18. During his lifetime, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in the king's valley as a monument to himself. Very modest guy, don't you think? Yeah, let's make sure the people know who I am and why I'm so important. For he thought, I have no son to carry on the memory of my name. Now, this is an interesting comment because just a few chapters earlier, we read that Absalom had 3 sons. Kind of makes you wonder what became of them. Something happened to them. Either that or, they either died or they went away or maybe just in Absalom's egotism, big swelled head, they didn't measure up to his expectations. So, my sons, I have no sons. So, I just don't have anyone to carry on my name. To have future generations of Absaloms. So I better make a monument to myself, which he did. named the pillar after himself. And even though Absalom is now totally discredited, has an anonymous grave somewhere, they keep the pillar up. It's called Absalom's monument to this day, at least to the day that this passage was written. So, decisive victory, glorious victory for David and David's men. And all that needs to be done is, hey, we need to get the news back to the king. So Ahimaaz, son of Zadok the priest, who was on David's side, said, let me run and take the news to the king that the Lord has vindicated him by delivering him from the hand of his enemies. You're not the one to take the news today, Joab told him. You can take the news another time, but you must not do so today because the king's son is dead. Hey, I admire your enthusiasm, but this is not the kind of news you want to carry back to David for obvious reasons. Then Joab said to a Cushite, go, tell the king what you've seen. The Cushite bowed down before Joab and ran off. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, again said to Joab, come what may, please let me run behind the Cushite. But Joab said, my son, why do you want to go? You don't have any news that's going to bring you a reward. He said, come what may, I want to run. So, hey, how can you deal with persistence like that? Joab said, run! Then Ahimaaz ran by way of the plain, and he outran the Cushite, who had a head start on him. While David was sitting between the inner and outer gates, the watchman went up to the roof of the gateway by the wall. As he looked out, he saw a man running alone. The watchman called out to the king and reported it. And good old King David, just feeling very, very optimistic. The king said, if he's alone, he must have good news. And the runner came closer and closer. Then the watchman saw another runner, and he called down to the gatekeeper, look, another man running alone. The king said, he must be bringing good news too. The watchman said, it seems to me that the first one runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. He's a good man, the king said. He comes with good news. And David is he's setting himself up here. Notice how many times he says, hey, we're going to get some good news here. Then Ahimaaz called out to the king, all is well. He bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and said, praise be to the Lord your God. He has delivered up those who lifted their hands against my lord the king. Well, good news, but David has one thing in mind. The king asked, is the young man Absalom safe? David here is probably not asking, very likely not asking for any kind of political or military reasons. He's asking as the father of a son, no matter how much of a bad son he is. Ahimaaz answered, and here you see the guy starting to fold under pressure because, I guess I'm getting what Joab was telling me. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news here. So he fudges his response. I saw great confusion just as Joab was about to send the king's servant and me, your servant, but I don't know what it was. The king said, stand aside and wait here. So he stepped aside and stood there. Then the Cushite arrived and said, my lord the king, hear the good news. The Lord has vindicated you today by delivering you from the hand of all who rose up against you. Once again, David asked, is the young man Absalom safe? The Cushite replied, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man. Ooh. Well, the Cushite delivered the news with great tact, don't you think? But hey, it's enough. David puts two and two together. The king was shaken. And by shaken, there's a physical response here. David starts to tremble violently. In fact, you could probably see him just physically falling apart, just not more than just a change of expression on his face. This is a guy who's probably doing everything he can to keep from collapsing, falling to the ground. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept, and not just weeping. As he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Yeah, this is the guy who was rebelling against him, would have killed him if he caught him. David was probably, that probably didn't matter to David. There was basically that love relationship between parent and child. Maybe there's a little bit of guilt creeping up on that. Maybe David just, you have one of those instantaneous thoughts that you really can't put into words, but the whole concept just comes home to you in a moment. Maybe that was happening to David as well, where David realizes, hey, my son has died today, and in great part because of everything that I have done wrong in my life. I was an indulgent parent. I raised a spoiled child. I didn't deal with evil when it presented itself in my family. Absalom grew up seeing the bad side of me, all the things that I did wrong, all the ways that I indulged my inner nature. And he saw that, did more than saw it, he acted on it. He made that part of his life as well. This is the end result. And now he has died. He has died in a lot of ways because of what I have done. And of course, this is part of the prophecy that Nathan lined out to David so many years earlier. He said, there will be discord in your family because of what you've done with Bathsheba and Uriah and her husband Uriah the Hittite. What you did in public or what you did in private, God is going to do in public. The sword will never leave your house. This is all coming home now to David in spades as he goes up the wall to this room, weeping, wailing, sobbing, calling out for Absalom. Chapter 19, the news gets back to Joab. Joab was told, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom and for the whole army. The victory that day was turned into mourning because on that day, the troops heard it said, the king is grieving for his son. The men stole into the city that day as men steal in who are ashamed when they flee from battle. If you live long enough, you work in enough places and situations, you see something like this going on occasionally from bad leadership. People either don't know how to lead the people that they supervise, or the company that they're in charge of, or when something really bad happens, they don't know how to deal with it. And there can be situations where a team just does an outstanding job, makes an outstanding sale, delivers on an outstanding project, and there's no response from their boss. Not only is there no response, in some cases they start nitpicking. Oh, well, this is what you did wrong, or this is what you did wrong, so forth. And this is an example of what bad leadership can do to team morale. Something to think about. But in this case also, this is more than just everybody having a bad day. Joab sees the risk of what's going to happen if David is allowed to carry on like this. Yes, he's lost a son, but he's still the king. This is more than a family matter. And David is allowing his personal grief to start affecting the eventual outcome of the health of the nation and the health of his kingship. So Joab went into the house to the king and said, with a little bit of sarcasm, gives one of those rare tough love speeches that all of us need every now and then. Hey, David, wake up. Pull yourself together. What he says is, today you have humiliated all your men who have just saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and concubines. Joab knew darn well what was going to happen if, if Absalom had won the day. Yeah, everybody, David and everyone associated with him would have been wiped out, would have been put to death for sure if they didn't escape with their lives. Verse 6, you love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You've made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Obviously, laced with sarcasm, he doesn't really mean it, and David knows he doesn't feel that way. But Joab's point is you might as well be this way if you keep on acting like this. Verse 7, now go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come on you from your youth till now. David, you think you've had some bad days running from Saul? That's going to be a Sunday school picnic compared to what's going to happen to you now if you don't turn this situation around and deal with your troops. Well, the tough love talk takes. David reorients himself. Verse 8, the king got up and took his seat in the gateway out in the center of the city where they were located. The men take notice. The men were told, the king is sitting in the gateway. They all came before him. And so the troops are re-energized. They're remotivated because their king has come out to address them. So David's quick action, Joab's tough talk saves the day for David and his men. There's still the issue of, okay, who's running the country? What's going on back in Jerusalem? Who is going to be in charge of what? You have this conversation going on. Verse 9. Throughout the tribes of Israel, because all the Israelites who had fought with Absalom, they've gone back home. And throughout all the tribes where they live, all the people were arguing among themselves. And they're kind of having a recollection here. They're revising their options here, thinking about, okay, what do we do here? Yeah, we kind of got swept up in the Absalom fad and the craze. And yeah, he was a good-looking guy, and that's all. That's great. But he's gone, and there's still David. And yeah, he's got his flaws, but maybe he's not that bad after all. Because listen to what they're saying here in verse 9. After all, the king delivered us from the hands of our enemies. He's the one who rescued us from the hand of the Philistines. Remember how the Philistines used to make our lives miserable? They cut the country in half with, the areas they were in charge of. David got rid of them. We're a unified country now. But now he's fled the country to escape from Absalom. And Absalom, who we anointed to rule over us, has died in battle. An inconvenient truth here. So, with Absalom gone, what are we going to do? And why do you say nothing about bringing the king back? Yeah, maybe we ought to take him back. Well, the word gets back to David. And this says something about David and his nature. Had it been anyone else, any king, any other military or political leader who had survived a scare like that, most of those guys would basically say, okay, game over. I'm back in charge now. Prepare the way because I'm coming. And I'm going to come back and be king whether you like it or not. David is not that way. David chooses to persuade people. I'll come back if you want me, but you've got to let me know. So, verse 11, King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar the priest, who are back in Jerusalem. And he says to them, ask the elders of Judah, Why should you be the last to bring the king back to his palace, since what is being said throughout Israel has reached the king at his quarters? You're my relatives, my own flesh and blood. So why should you be the last to bring back the king? David is basically saying, hey guys, all's forgiven. There'll be spats, yeah. We'll always have arguments, but at the end of the day, we all love each other. We're all brothers and sisters. I'm ready to come back. Not only that, he's willing to make some political accommodations. Verse 13, say to Amasa, are you not my own flesh and blood? Which he is. Amasa is his nephew, one of his nephews anyway. May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you are not the commander of my army for life in place of Joab. Amasa, I'm giving you a promotion, even though you led my son's rebel troops. I'll put you in charge of my troops. How about that? Just to show what a great guy I am and how willing and how forgiving I am as king. It's a political accommodation. It also is a little slap in the face to Joab because, after all, regardless of all the other good things Joab has done for Joab basically disregarded David's wishes about Absalom. Even though it was probably politically the right thing to do, it violated David's expectations. So by doing this, David won over the hearts of the men of Judah, so that they were all of one mind. This was not a plurality vote. It wasn't even a majority vote. It is 100%. Yeah, let's get David back, as far as the sentiment of the Israelites. They sent word to the king, return, you and all your men. Then the king returned and went as far as the Jordan River. Remember, they're on the other side of the river. They're far away from Jerusalem. It's time for him to return. And what he's looking for is an escort that says, come on home, come on back. All is forgiven. Now, the men of Judah, the tribe of Judah, had come to Gilgal to go out and meet the king and bring him across the Jordan. The men of Judah, basically also part of from which David was kin to. And as David prepares to cross the Jordan, he comes across two significant encounters. Interestingly enough, it's the same two encounters that he had when he was fleeing Jerusalem, and we know how those turned out. Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim, hurried down with the men of Judah to meet King David. With him were 1,000 Benjamites, along with Ziba, that's the other guy, the steward of Saul's household, and his 15 sons and 20 servants. They rushed to the Jordan where the king was. They crossed at the ford to take the king's household over and to do whatever he wished. And in all this procession, here comes Shimei, son of Gera. He fell prostrate before the king, falls on his face before the king, and said to him, may my lord not hold me guilty. They probably had trouble understanding him because if he was falling on his face, it sounded like this. May my lord not hold me guilty. But they get the message across, and he says something else. Do not remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind. What did Shimei do? Oh, he was a bad boy. He was a real bad actor. He came up, and this was when political consensus was, and popular opinion was, that David is toast. He's on his way out. He ain't coming back. There was old Shimei cursing David and throwing rocks at him and kicking dirt on him as he fled. Not the best kind of behavior, even if it was for totally valid reasons, which in this case it was not. Well, Shimei has had a change of heart, or at least he has read the political winds and he knows that he's in trouble now that David's coming back. So, hey, David, all that stuff I did. Hey, don't give it a second thought. I was I was having kind of a bad day, and I just uh, don't worry about it. Please put it out of your mind, for I, your servant, know that I have sinned. But today I've come here as the first from the tribes of Joseph to come down and meet my lord the king. David, I really, really, really am sorry. Did I say enough reallys? How about really, 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 really? This guy could not apologize enough, and for good reason, because here's old Abishai, verse 21, part of David's team, one of the mighty warriors who remembered very well what Shimei said and did. And back then, he was ready to kill the guy. Today, he's still ready to kill the guy. He asked David, shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this? He cursed the Lord's anointed. David is more forgiving. Verse 22, he replied, what does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? Abishai, that's his dad, or at least, yeah. What right do you have to interfere? Should anyone be put to death in Israel today? Don't I know that today I am king over Israel? Hey, I'm just happy to be back. I am, just as the people of Israel have basically forgiven me and taken me back, I need to have the same kind of forgiving spirit. So the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. And the king promised him on oath. Keep that in mind. We'll probably talk about that a little bit later on. Well, on to the second significant encounter. And here is, in verse 24, dear old Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, who also went down to meet the king. Now, you remember who Mephibosheth is. He's crippled because he got dropped by his nursemaid early in his life. And because he's also Saul's grandson, he figured that he was toast when David became king. But he's also the grandson, not only grandson of Saul, he's the son of Jonathan, David's dearest friend. And so, because David wants to keep his promise of looking out for Jonathan and his family and his descendants, he says, who can I show kindness to? They locate Mephibosheth, they bring him to the king's palace, and he says, hey, Mephibosheth, you've got a place at my table for the rest of your life, and you'll never have to worry about anything at all because I will take care of you. But during this time of rebellion, Mephibosheth had not taken care of his feet or trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned safely. Depending on how long David was out of town, this guy is physically and probably odorously a mess. So when he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, and this was something very much on the king's mind. Why didn't you go with me, Mephibosheth? And sure enough, when David was fleeing, Mephibosheth was nowhere to be seen. His servant, his steward, Ziba, comes up and says, oh, well, there's an explanation for that, king. He's just waiting for you and your son to kill each other, and when the dust settles, he'll come up as the descendant of Saul, the old King Saul, and take over the kingship. And because of that, David makes a snap decision and says, okay, everything that I've given from Saul's household to Mephibosheth is now yours, Ziba. It's all yours, baby. You take care of it. Well, Mephibosheth has this moment of accountability, and he has what turns out sounds like a very, very good explanation. My lord the king, since I, your servant, am lame, I said, I will have my donkey saddled and will ride on it so I can go with the king. I intended to go with you, King David, but Ziba, my servant, betrayed me. And he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. My lord the king is like an angel of God, so do whatever you wish. All my grandfather's descendants deserve nothing but death from my lord the king. But you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table. So what right do I have to make any more appeals to the king? Mephibosheth is saying, hey, look, I don't care about getting any of my stuff back. I was set up and I was betrayed by my so-called loyal steward. Let him keep that stuff. I'm just happy to have you back. I would have gone with you if I had not been deceived by my untrustworthy servant. So David thinks things over and he makes a change in his ruling. He says, why say more? I order you and Ziba to divide the land. Let's just split the difference and call it a day. Mephibosheth said to the king, let him take everything, now that my lord the king has returned home safely. And then there's one other person that David deals with, a very kindly old man named Barzillai, a Gileadite who also came down from Rogelim to cross the Jordan with the king and to send him on his way from there. Now he was very old, 80 years old, and he'd provided for the king during his stay in Mahanaim when he was in exile, for he was a very wealthy man. The king said to Barzillai, hey, I want to repay you for your kindness here. Cross over with me, stay with me in Jerusalem, and I will provide for you. Hey, in most cases, that would be an offer you couldn't refuse. If the king wants you to come with him, and hey, I'll take care of you for the rest of your life, keep you in comfort, most folks will say, okay. Barzillai says, nah, but for certain reasons. He says, look, how many more years will I live that I should go up to Jerusalem with the king? I'm now 80 years old. And man, I'm getting, age takes a toll on you, on all of your senses and all your enjoyment of life. Can I tell the difference between what's enjoyable and what's not? Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks? Can I still hear the voices of male and female singers? Why should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant will cross over the Jordan with the king for a short distance, but why should the king reward me this way? Let your servant return, that I may die in my own town near the tomb of my father and mother. But hey, I got an idea. Here is your servant Kimham, who most commentators think is this guy's son. You don't have to worry about me, but hey, my son here could use a little help here. So let him cross over with my lord the king. Do for him whatever you wish. The king said, Kimham will cross over with me, and I'll do for him whatever you wish. And anything you desire from me, I will do for you. So all the people crossed the Jordan, and then the king crossed over. The king kissed Barzillai and bid him farewell. Barzillai returned to his home. When the king crossed over to Gilgal, Kimham crossed with him. All the troops of Judah and half the troops of Israel had taken the king over. So great homecoming is in store for King David. All the rough spots are patched over. All the bad stuff with Absalom is forgotten, right? Well, tune in again next week. Look at the rest of chapter 19 and also chapter 20. That'll be the basis of our lesson for next Sunday. And thank you for your time. I hope you got something out of the lesson. And Lord willing, we'll see you guys next Sunday.